A landmark decision
No hate, no fear. Muslims are welcome here.
that led to cross-country protests.
A tremendous success, a tremendous victory for the American people.
But a victory for the White House is striking a chord for some here in the Buckeye State.
They're just in despair and disbelief, and I think that's my reaction. It feels like I'm speaking at a funeral.
A longtime justice leaves the High Court, and the search for Anthony Kennedy's replacement will be vital in future decisions.
Big part of that is the Supreme Court that, again, a corporatist Supreme Court that, again, comes down on the side of corporations against workers.
And weeks of indecision push important issues to the back burner at the State House. Now it'll be months before Ohioans get an answer on things like payday lending and the Stand Your Ground gun bill. Face the State starts right now. Ohio is seeing the impact of decisions made on the national stage and the last-minute rush to vote on legislation here in the Buckeye State. Good morning, everyone. We welcome you to this Sunday morning. I'm Scott Light. So we have got a great group of guests this week, and let me introduce you to them right now. Roman Iqbal is back with us, Legal Director of CARE Columbus, the Council on American Islamic Relations. Tracy Wimbush is here, the former treasurer of the Ohio Republican Party and former executive with Mahoning County GOP. And we are always happy to welcome back Dr. Suzanne Marilli, professor of history and political science at Capital University. Welcome all. It's good to have you here. Let's begin with that travel ban. And I want to play a couple of comments that we got from some folks here locally. I mean, there are going to be some local impacts when it comes to this. Let's play those comments right now.
Regardless of the decision today, the travel ban remains what it has always been, an expression of animosity towards Muslims and a movement towards state-sanctioned discrimination.
They're just in despair and disbelief, and I think that's my reaction. It feels like I'm speaking at a funeral.
So that is certainly one side of this story, but you probably saw in our open there, President Trump, Roman calling this a tremendous victory for the American people. What's the impact here in Ohio?
Well, the impact here locally in central Ohio is that you have families who will not be able to see their loved ones. There are families here who have a father, sometimes a child, sometimes a mother who is stuck abroad. And we have been facing these phone calls now since the decision came out of very anguished family members calling us and saying, look, I really want to see my father, I really want to see my son, and these people now unfortunately will not be able to see their family members because of this decision.
What the number of phone calls that are coming into CARE's local offices here? Are we talking a dozen or hundreds?
Well, we're talking in dozens, the phone calls, but, because, you know, the decision is so clear, there really is no reason to call anybody. And we had explained to these people, look, if the decision comes out against you, well, there's really nothing anybody can do for you. So, and you know, for us, the concern here is not that these families will continue to be separated. The concern here is that the Supreme Court has given the president such unfettered powers on this issue that he could expand the list. He could put more countries on it. He could put countries from Central America. He could put countries from Africa. And this was just not a very good decision for if you want Congress to legislate immigration and not the president. This was a very bad day.
What do you say to that? Unfettered power.
I don't think
to the executive branch.
You know, when you look at the Constitution and securing our borders, it is imperative that we make sure that America is secure, not because they're Muslim countries, not because of their religious base, but because of their fundamental belief of the hatred of America and our way of life. And we need to have immigration reform, and we need to do something about our policies around the globe so that we're more secure with the exchange of people coming in and out, but not so much because of the hatred of the Islamic religion. It's because of the fear of those who may come who want to disrupt our way of life.
Professor, this is another one of those issues that just galvanizes people on both sides, doesn't it?
Yes, well, the challenge of defending borders, that's an immense challenge. However, the ban has roots in this politics of exclusion that Donald Trump ran on and continues to practice, the separation of families in such a horrific way without much planning, foresight, working through things, very careless work to begin with. And in the case of the ban, I think particularly the Yemen comes to mind because so many people there are losing everything they've had with the bombings and starvation. That is a human rights tragedy, and Yemen shouldn't really be on that list, or if they are, there ought to be some provisions for including our rules on qualifications for refugees, because there's simply no question that many people there are in threat of life and a future of life and so forth, loss of children, well-being, even the basic buildings and clean water and access to food. It's a tragic situation we face here.
Do you think President Trump has framed it? He'll talk about immigration, and then he'll immediately go to, we can't let MS-13 gang members into our country. To your point, those gang members, that may be 1/1000th of a percentage of people who are coming in. It is people coming here for asylum. They are fleeing oppressive governments. They want better economic situations for their family.
And I agree with that. And we should have a passage for them to come in and to make sure that we're still secure, whether it be M13, whether it be drug trafficking, whether it be whatever it is. The issue that we have here, and the problem that we have here, is we keep on going to the campaign trail and not the policy. What people say on campaign trails, you can't take at full circle, no matter who it is. And we continue to keep biting back to the campaign and not to the policy. Now, again, we do need to do something about immigration. We need to do something about ICE. And we need to understand that this is not a new issue. This has been going on for decades. And the cowardness of our Congress, of the politicizing of their job every time they go to work, instead of dealing with the policies and the laws that govern this country, are dividing the American people and the globe.
But let's be clear. This decision now turns the president into an immigration czar. This gives him unfettered powers as long as, according to this decision, as long as the president can come out and say it's a national security concern. He does not have to produce evidence. He does not have to show in any way demonstrate why the factual predicate for what he's claiming. So he just has to come out and say this is a national security issue. Now, if you look at the crisis from south of the border, he calls it an infestation. He says these people are gang members. There is no reason to believe now that the president now will be unable to just expand the ban. In fact, it's very likely that he will use the powers given by him by the court to now simply say a large category of countries from Central and South America, well, you can't come here either because it is a national security concern, and the issue now is that he does not have to produce the evidence.
What happened to Carter? Carter did the same thing.
He did.
What was the difference?
The difference was that he did that for one country which had taken over an embassy. There was the Republic of Iran at that time had taken over a U.S. embassy. There was an ongoing crisis. What the president has done is he has put all these countries on a list, and they have a year and a half, by the way, since the first ban. They have not been able to come out and show what is the factual predicate, what is the actual evidence, what is the actual risk that these countries pose to the United States. They have not been able to do that. They simply say it, and the unfortunate part is that the Supreme Court said, well, as long as the president says it, it's fine.
But there is information that comes within the confines of offices that aren't public. Because of national security, they have security clearances that you can't go out and talk about everything. Now, I understand that we may not comprehend everything that President Trump does or that he says, but when I look at the security of America, we may have to have a ban for all countries until we get our country right. Because right now, all countries, because right now, we have a serious problem within our own country. We have issues. We are paying for things that we can't afford to pay for and can't take care of the citizens that we have here.
Well, we go back. President Obama had a very steep learning curve on exactly this. He was deporting 400 to 500,000 a year in his first term, and there were protests. Finally, he and his policymakers adjusted such that they basically trusted many who were coming to find places to live and go to court. And it turns out that most did actually follow that rule, in the high 90%. Sonia Nazario wrote about this recently in the New York Times, and she's been a long student of this, wrote Enrique's Journey, actually lived on the trains, followed the path of a former child who made it into the United States. So he went from the policy that costs so much a day, I mean in the hundreds of dollars, to $30 to $40 a day. But it took him 6 or 7 years to accept and get on board. I think what's really a problem here, again, is this partisanship that they're, as you said, Tracy, that they get in and they just are sort of bilking their media exposure, and we're forgetting our sense of history. We're forgetting continuities that presidents can learn from each other and build on achievements, past achievements,
I don't know
and
how
mistakes, learning from their mistakes. And why are they making them all over again?
Because President Obama, he deported something like 3.8 million
No
people.
president
all
deported
together.
more people than President
So
Obama.
we need to understand
Yes.
this issue is, and the problem with the bias and the politicism of Congress that will not do their job, because we need to change immigration reform in totality, not just the dreamers, not just the children, not just the borders, but immigration, because it's not right, it's not fair, and you should not have to be a millionaire to come to America to live and get a green card for your wife.
Well, let's be clear, 2 points. Under President Obama, ICE was prioritized to basically deport the criminals. Right. They were focusing on criminals. Yes, they deported a lot of people, but they were focusing on criminals. They were focusing on recent arrivals. This president has taken a decision that he has taken to be, if you are an asylee, which means that you are escaping gangs from Central America, which means that you may be a victim of domestic violence, when these asylees are coming to the south of the border, this is not Congress. Congress has not told the president that separate the families from the children. This is the president's choice. This is the choice he has made.
President Obama. And let me say, I have to correct you, because there was a gentleman up in Youngstown, Ohio, who was just deported.
By President Trump?
No. His deportation papers came under President Obama. His private bill that was put in the hopper was put in there, and it fell through the cracks when the rules of Congress changed. That is the problem. And it was not pushed through, and the Immigration Department actually just dropped out.
Right, and I'm actually familiar with the Youngstown case, and that is the point. Under President Obama, yes, if you broke the law, you would face consequences.
He didn't break the law. He was a businessman then,
right,
he was a businessman now. The papers were signed under President Obama. Congressman Ryan put a private bill in the hopper that gave him a stay. And as long as it was in the hopper, they did not act on it. When the rules of Congress changed and they could act on things that were sitting in the hopper, it fell through the cracks. So what I'm saying is there are people, even under President Obama, but we need to quit comparing the administrations and understand this problem is an American problem, and it has lasted decades, and we need to pressure our congressmen and our senators to do their job.
But Congress is not telling him to separate children from their parents, right? President Obama is not telling President Trump.
He did the same. Remember,
Obama did not separate children and put them in cages.
The federal court actually went after him and told him that he was no longer allowed to detain children inside of the prison system, that they were detaining the parents because of the deplorable conditions. It's the same issue.
No, what happened to President Obama was you had children coming unaccompanied. When you have children coming from Central America unaccompanied, obviously the federal government had to figure out a way where to keep those children when they're coming without their parents. In this case,
all these are not parents. They're still children. And again, you're
but they are coming with their parents now.
Let me say this. If you know that there's a crazy man in the White House and you know that he's going to separate you at the border, why would you take your children to the border?
Because these are desperate people who are seeking asylum, and these are people escaping gang violence. These are people escaping domestic violence. They have no choice.
And again, they're coming here, but if you know that you're going to be separated from your children, why would you put your children in
Because they're so
risk?
desperate, because they will not survive in those countries, because these are asylees. That's what asylum means. That you have a credible fear.
Everyone is not there.
Fear of threat to your life.
And then
That's
we
why
need to
you
come through
here.
the right way and not illegally across other parts of the border.
Here's my fear. I need to hit a commercial break, and then we will come back and we will certainly continue this discussion, including this, taking a line from the past and maybe applying it to the here and now. Does history and politics show good things coming to the GOP, and what it could mean for Ohio's governor's race? Welcome Welcome back, everyone. Let's talk a little history. After all, we have a history and political science professor here. Some Democrats hope this year's midterms will be like 2006. We all remember it. We all watched it when Dems rolled Republicans nationally. That also put our first woman as Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, after the 2006 midterms. But I saw this and I sent this to you guys from the Cook Political Report earlier this week from the great Amy Walter. Her headline read like this: "Good news for the GOP. It's not 2006. Some of her analysis pointed to President Trump's approval rating being 10 points higher than President Bush's approval was back then. There's a more unified GOP base these days and more base satisfaction with this president." As our resident historian here, is her analysis, do you think, pretty spot on, or there's some holes there?
She's making an excellent point. However, we need to remember that Donald Trump has a very loyal, intensely loyal following that ranges somewhere between 36 and 40%, maybe a little more. In the wake of the North Korea summit meeting and the strong economy, he jumped up to about 45% approval last week, but then in the wake of the separation, it's back down to around 41%. So he's has sluggish, very low overall ratings, and it's just hard to know what will happen in these elections. It all depends on turnout. There's no question, I think, that in every race, in every district where Donald Trump won by a large margin or comfortable margin, that any Democrat who is challenging will find him or herself in a difficult situation. But the 12th, as I understand it, here in Ohio,
District 12.
Where Donald Trump did not do as well as Mitt Romney or John McCain, that does seem at the moment to be a pretty close race. So those are the kinds of districts where there are better chances for Democrats. I'd be really careful to make a generalization that Walters did. She needs to for the headlines, but I think she knows that there's so many factors, and it's way early to predict what will happen.
4 or 5 months is like 4 or 5 years in politics. And her last line, I don't know if you guys hung in for her very last line, but she said, "But as we saw with Trump's decision to double down on the wildly unpopular family separation issue, he can just as easily and quickly squander his advantages." Do you worry about that? The wild card that is President Trump's Twitter feed.
President Trump is very, very smart and very, very calculating, and I think he's misread by the media, by the public, and by his naysayers. And you have to understand that he is a student of numbers, media, marketing, branding. He knows what he's doing and the timing of it, and he knows how to get it right. Because if you look at when he first walked in, his numbers were very low, they stayed low, and he has now this thing going up, and he has ebbs and flows of going on his popularity. His base that he has still up in the Northeast Ohio is still very loyal to him.
They're locked in.
They are done.
Yeah.
The question is, how far will they go down ticket, and how will they touch the state races? Because if you remember in 2006, we got we bit the dust and we rolled in it because we lost everything. We lost our shirt. I don't think that's going to happen this year, but the races are going to be more competitive, and this is the year of the empowerment of people. They have to go out and exercise not only their right, but they have to let their people that they're voting for know what they want. They have to be informed and push them to actually command what they want from the people who are running on both sides.
Speaking of other races, Roman, I think you saw this as well. A couple of political publications this week moved our governor's race from leans Republican, leaning in DeWine's favor, to toss-up status now.
Right, and that was not surprising. These are both very strong candidates, but I think that DeWine has way more money than Rich Cordray has. So once DeWine unleashes his money on the campaign, I think it'll be a couple more months, and we can decide whether Richard Cordray can hang around with DeWine, because DeWine has a lot of money to unleash in campaign ads. And let's see if, once that barrage comes, let's see if Richard Cordray can still, hang around in the polls with DeWine.
Do you think the governor's race is a toss-up?
No, and I'll tell you why. We tend to forget that Mike DeWine is a crossover moderate People like him. Independents like him.
Will Trump supporters like him and vote for him?
Yes, they will.
But will they will they have that fervor, that fury that impassion to go, all right, I am going to the polls for Mike DeWine?
It all depends on what the president does.
Well, 40% of them voted for Taylor, the Lieutenant Taylor.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, and because they was the actual Trump supporters, they actually went in for Taylor. They did not go for DeWine. And Taylor set herself out as the, as the true Trumpian candidate in the race, in the primary, and to everybody's surprise, she got over 40% of the vote.
Professor, I had Mary Taylor sitting in your seat, Roman, and I asked her going forward, I said, will there be a campaign event with you, Mary Taylor, Governor Kasich, and Mike DeWine on the same stage? I think she would have laughed if there hadn't been cameras here in our studio, but she said, I don't know. And I said, you don't know that if you three can come together? And she said, I just don't know. I mean, that's a fractured Republican Party.
No, it's not.
How is it not?
Because it's not. It's a person. She had her backing at that time, but when you go and look at the policies, look at the people that come out and vote, and those that supported her, if they're voting, they're not going to vote for Cordray. They may not come out and knock on doors.
When you've got three people who hold statewide elected office, and they won't be on the same stage, maybe?
I have learned, I'm a newcomer to Ohio. My observation is that Ohio voters are very crafty, and much has been said lately on the waning, the almost evaporation of moderates in especially our national government. But Ohio has held strong. Ohio's tilts somewhat right, I think, but I have to say Rob Portman has stood up on various issues. He certainly pushed on the opioid crisis. I think that, and of course, John Kasich standing up to the most conservative, fearful of the federal health care policy of the Obamacare. Making those distinctions between what he thought was adequate and rational and what he thought wasn't, but then supporting Medicaid. So, I think probably we have some interesting conversations going on among Republicans on how do we manage this, how do we move forward, and then I'll just add, in Franklin County, which tends to be very solidly Democratic and likely to support Democrats, we have this crew SC team, but there's a lawsuit that Mike DeWine is part of trying to keep that soccer team here, and there's been quite an organized and impressive effort to keep them here. So you never know what the spillover could be, but if they wind up keeping the crew, that gives him Mike DeWine something to trumpet that really is particular to Central Ohio and even to Cincinnati and the rivalry. And so there's often these interesting connections between sports and politics. So we could just be rewarded for that, money aside.
Yeah. I don't think Columbus Crew will carry DeWine, but I think the issue is that because President Trump has nationalized the election, every local race, I think it'll be hard for Democrats to win any statewide race if President Trump's polling numbers keep going up. I mean, he was in 30s for all of his presidency. Now it's up in 40s. And if this stays in mid 40s, I just find it very hard. I don't think that Democrats can win any statewide election if President Trump continues to be popular, and especially in Ohio, he's over 50%, by the way.
And I've heard some Democrats even say, if we, they're talking about themselves as Democrats, if we can't win a statewide race now, they say, when will we? And I've heard some people say the Democratic Party is going to have to basically implode itself in the state if they can't win a statewide office.
Well, I mean, since 2016, since the November election of President Trump, the Democrats have performed very well in almost all the races. So we still don't know. We are still 5 months away from November. But I do agree that if in November Democrats cannot win any statewide election, that would be something the Democratic Party will be facing a very, very serious challenge, because if they cannot win this year, then yes, that would be a fair question. When can they win? But as I said, you know, this is about President Trump. He has completely nationalized this election. He's tweeting every day. If his popularity rating in Ohio stays over 50%, I think Democrats may very well lose all statewide election. Now, they may lose closely, but they may.
You're over here licking your chops thinking about that.
I mean, I have to add, remember, Sherrod Brown is on, and I think he is certainly leading in the polls, and that the Democrats could do better than some of us might think, not because of the Democratic Party in Ohio, but because of the effort to re-enroll, re-register voters who were purged. So we had the upholding of the purge, and yet Breyer said a million cards were not returned. And so there definitely have been major voter registration initiatives that started in May by Planned Parenthood of Ohio, other organizations. The ACLU People Power has taken this up as voter rights really matter. And so that's at the core of this politics of exclusion.
I sit on the Board of Elections.
Yes.
And the problem that we have, and I'm in Youngstown City, and the problem that we have is not the registrations. The problem that we have is getting the people to come out and vote.
Yeah.
I mean, you can register all you want, but if you don't exercise your right, you have no voice. And the problem is the Democrat Party has left their base, and I don't want to see a single party. As a Republican, I like competitive spirits. I like to see
we need checks and balances.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't want to see one party rule. But I'll say this, you have to have a reason for you to come out and vote and to embrace the issues of the people who are on the left side. Just like you have to have the same thing on the right side.
But the purging of voter rolls is not helping. And the Supreme Court, again, in the last couple of weeks, another decision for Ohio, where they said that this purging of the voter rolls in Ohio
well, I agree with it. As a board member, I agree with it because if you don't vote in 2 presidential election cycles and we send out a card and it returns back to us, come on. Just go re-register.
It will disproportionately impact the minorities and will disproportionately impact poor people.
But we've got to get them to come out and vote. They can vote by mail, 28 days. We got this.
And a 5-4 decision. So that's the weakest kind of Supreme Court decision.
And
here we go.
And I have a feeling there are going to be many 5-4 decisions
That's true.
coming in the months and years to come. A great discussion as always. Thank you for being here this Sunday morning. Still ahead, making sure that kids